end zone. Underthrown the cover, touchdown. Trey Tucker. To the end zone it goes. Caught! Touchdown, Armand Benz.
It's Bearcat Blitz time on the Believe Network. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host. Joining me across the way there, Neil Meyer. Russ Heltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI, and Neil of Cincinnati Rivals Front Office News.com. Injury updates on the basketball front, plus a full preview of this weekend's latest night game road trip for the Cincinnati Bearcats football team, taking on the Iowa State Cyclones as decent-sized favorites entering this contest, or decent-sized underdogs, excuse me. Iowa State is favorite going into this one. Start off with the update on Dan Skillings Jr.'s knee procedure, minor knee procedure, according to Wes Miller. Day Thomas, an update on when he might be back on the floor, and then we'll get into that preview on offense, on defense, and a prediction from Neil Meyer and myself. But first, I want to tell you all about Bet Online. It's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL, to UFC and MMA. Head to Bet Online today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Bet Online. The game starts here. And Neil may get Day Thomas back on the floor Friday night. I'm not super confident that we see that happen, but we will definitely not be seeing Dan Skillings this Friday or for the next few Fridays to come.
Yeah, no, most certainly. I think we might see Day Thomas on Friday, well, tomorrow night. But overall, kind of sounds like Wes Miller said that the game plan for Day Thomas is going to be play by ear. They'll know more tomorrow after shoot-around, but they want to be overly cautious with Day Thomas. And honestly, Russ, I think you and I both talked about this off the record multiple times, that there is nothing wrong with that, especially heading into a gauntlet of a Big 12 season throughout these first three games. You do not want to rush Day Thomas back, but the bigger blow for Cincinnati is that Dan Skillings is going to be out for several weeks with the knee injury sustained in the Arkansas Pine Bluff game after undergoing a minor procedure. Now, it's not exactly to be determined on what the time frame might look like. It's obviously kind of different for every human being after the kind of procedure he had. But overall, the good news is it is not a season-ending injury, and it sounds like it was a very, very minor procedure, and all things went as planned, according to Wes Miller.
Quote here, it was pretty minor. It was as good as it could go. And I bet if I told Dan Skillings I wanted him to play Friday night, he'd probably try to dang play and be fine. Now, we ain't doing anything like that, but I think he'll be out for a week or two, couple weeks. And then from there, it'll be a week-to-week decision on when he plays again. So I can't give you a timetable. I can say it won't be the next couple weeks, but after that, it'll kind of take it week to week. So, Neil, that means that Dan almost assuredly will not be there. He's not going to be playing in the road contest next week for Cincinnati against Northern Kentucky. And then you start looking at the game against Georgia Tech, the road matchup against the Yellow Jackets, which Cincinnati going to be, I would imagine, favored by a little bit there. But even without Dan Skillings, that's going to be a tough game to win. So there's some issues on the schedule here, and you're eyeing hopefully a return a month to the day from now against Xavier, and ideally you'd like to have him in the fold for a tune-up game, just get his feet back wet and live action off of the layoff against Howard 6 days earlier. That might be asking a little too much given the overly cautious approach that they're taking, justifiably and correctly, I think, with these injuries. But all in all, Neil, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 6 games missed, maybe 7 if he's still not able to get back for Xavier. But it looks like the best way to kind of gauge whether or not this thing's going to plan in terms of the recovery is if he's back for that Xavier game in a month from today.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And that would be crucial for Cincinnati, is to have Dan Skillings back for Xavier. Everybody obviously knows the hype surrounding the crosstown shootout, but most importantly, that Dan Skillings plays a tremendous role in what that game could be. Obviously, this could be a matchup that could go either way even prior to the injury, everyone knows how hyped up this crosstown shootout rivalry is. But overall for Dan Skillings, I think his presence on the floor in that game could be a game changer for Cincinnati. I mean, just like any game with Dan Skillings, he's a game changer when he's out there, guys, and everybody knows that. However, the young man's health is the most important thing, and everybody knows the skyrocket of potential that Dan has set for himself. I mean, there's precedents where Dan Skillings could be playing basketball for a very long time and in the very near future as well. So overall, I think you don't want to rush him back, and I agree with what Wes Miller is saying there, especially due to how important he's going to be during Big 12 play. I've talked about it with Day Thomas being important. Dan Skillings might just be more important than Day Thomas come Big 12 play, even though guard play wins you games. Dan Skillings is a guy who led the team in scoring last season, was second on the team in rebounding. He can do it all. We saw it there in Arkansas Pine Bluff, despite having the injury, finished with 17 and 11 on 12 of 17 shooting. But most importantly, Dan Skillings is going to be a crucial part to this team, especially on the rebounding aspect of this. But to have him out there versus Xavier, I think that would be the exact kind of time frame from what some things we are hearing. But if it's me, I kind of hold him out of the Xavier game. I give him an extra week and bring him back versus Dayton. But that's just me personally.
And honestly, Neil, I could see that being exactly how this plays out. Just the way Wes Miller has been, you're 100% ready? Good. We're going to wait another week, which justify. I mean, he's run into some, like John Newman, perfect example, where I think he kind of learned, maybe, I don't know if he learned a lesson.
I think he learned a lot from the Newman injury.
Right. But not that he needed to learn a lesson or anything, but that was a prime example of kind of playing the roulette wheel of when to bring a guy back. You don't necessarily bring him back too early in that sense, with John Newman getting hurt late in the season in his opening year at Cincinnati. But just, yeah, that's how it played out, right? Now it was like they brought Newman back like in the back half of the season, and then they had to shut him down again before the end of the campaign, and then he was shut down for good. Didn't come back for the rest of the year until his final year of eligibility a few months later. Yeah,
so Newman actually redshirted the 2022-2023 season. That's how he got that extra year, was he fully sat out. They said he could bring him back, but despite playing in the one game, he lost the redshirt. He got the medical. So NCAA did something right for once on that aspect. But I think for Wes Miller, too, another prime situation you look at regarding the injuries, CJ Frederick last year is a prime example as well.
Yeah, great point.
That's a prime example as well. And they saw how it affected the team last season. And they don't want to do that this year. Obviously, Cincinnati didn't have the depth that they had last season. But now you look at nearly 365 days later to what Wes Miller has on paper. I mean, it's kind of realistic that Cincinnati could be just fine without Dan Skillings for a couple games, especially here in the non-conference slate before a gauntlet of a Big 12 schedule. And I think that's the most important thing, Russ, is you want him healthy for non-conference or for conference play, because the conference play is where and if you're in the Big 12, that's where you're building your NCAA tournament resume. It's right there in conference play. I mean, 20 games this year compared to 18, and all 20 of them will be a quad 1 or a quad 2 game more than likely.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up CJ Frederick. Another example of a lower body injury right there, where these injuries could just be so finicky. They're the worst part of covering sports or the worst part of playing sports. It's just, unfortunately, part of the games, these injuries. And ironically, CJ Frederick, Neil, now a guy that's going to be asked to step up in the stead of Dan Skillings, one of those guys that moves up in the rotation with Dan being out for the next, what looks like at least a month, if not a little longer, given the couple weeks after that timeline that Wes Miller roughly set up. No hard timeline right now around Dan Skillings and when he is going to ultimately definitely return. Day Thomas potentially returning Friday, Neil. We'll just have to see tomorrow. I mean, there's no other real way to gauge it. He's been at practice, was involved in practice on Thursday, did more so than just the sprinting up and down at the practice that we watched last week. So increased production, increased usage out of Day Thomas in that sense, but shoot around going to largely tell the full story once we get there on Friday night against Nicholls State. Not enough time in this show to really discuss Nicholls State. Bottom line is the Bearcats need to win this game, and they need to do it I wouldn't say by 25, 30 points, because Nicholls State is a definite top 200 team, and they've played some serious competition pretty tight in road scenarios so far this year. But a double-digit win should be definitely on the table for Cincinnati in this home matchup against Nicholls State. Wrapping up the basketball side of things, moving to football in just a moment, right here on Bearcat Blitz. A trip to Ames, Iowa, Neil. Tyson Veit, pseudo homecoming, kind of a homecoming. Not really. He didn't grow up in Ames, Iowa, but he's was there for the majority of the past decade as an assistant on Matt Campbell's staff. And now he is leading the Bearcats defense into one of their tougher tasks of the entire season, trying to slow down a very balanced offense from Iowa State and the Cyclones. In the rundown, I said we start on offense. We're going to start on defense in light of Tyson Veit and his start turn this week. Neil, defensively for Cincinnati, they've really turned things on in the conference portion of the slate here. There's been some hiccups here and there, but there's been some mix-in of great play, which we saw last week against West Virginia. You had an issue against Colorado. The few games before that, Arizona State, they play very well against. They shut out Houston this year. And then obviously in the other night road game, you give up 40+ to Texas Tech. They've given up 34+ points in both road games so far this year. Very interesting challenge for Cincinnati Bearcats defense going up against Iowa State in a game, Neil, where Iowa State is favored by 9 points now. The spread has climbed from 7 points all the way up to 9 on betonline.ag, with the total sitting at 53.5 points. Not a lot of bettors giving the Bearcats defense much chance of ultimately collapsing on the Iowa State offense.
Yeah, no, most certainly, Russ. And I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing that stands out in this game is how will Cincinnati's defense respond under Tyson Veit versus former team. Everybody knows what you're going to get. The 3-3-5, you're going to see it on both ends. And for me, Russ, in order for Cincinnati to win this game, you got to win the turnover margin. You got to get not one, but 2 turnovers versus a very dominant Iowa State offense on Saturday for Tyson Veit in this Bearcats defense. If they are able to,
Cyclones don't turn the ball over very often.
They don't turn
Number 2 in the conference in turnover margin this season.
Yep, they do not turn the ball over, and one thing they are good at is creating turnovers. So they got to take the opportunities when they are there. You got to find ways to pressure Rocco Becht. If they can do that alongside Dante Corleone, Eric Phillips, Darian Varner, Jared Bartlett, Jake Golday, whoever it may be, make Rocco Becht uncomfortable as can be. And he is a prolific passer. Everyone has seen the steps he's taken from year 1 to year 2. Guys, this was a quarterback who came in last season to Nippert Stadium as a true freshman or a redshirt freshman and just struggled mightily in the passing game. This year, he's not going to turn the ball over much. So Cincinnati's defense, you got to stand tall. You got to take your opportunities when you're there. But he is a dual threat quarterback. He can beat you with his arms. He can beat you with his legs. Got to wrap him up when you get the opportunity there. But Russ, for me, the key for Cincinnati on this game is you need a big game from the secondary. How will the 3-3-5 look versus Rocco Becht this season? Got to have at least 2 turnovers. But, Russ, for you, I'm going to expect a big day from Jake Golday here yet again. Cincinnati's leading tackler on the season. But in order for them to be successful on Saturday in Ames, Iowa, you're going to have to get a big game from him at that linebacker position.
Linebackers have been playing really well.
Very well this season.
Bartlett. I mean, Neil, I think the linebackers are probably the strength of the defense.
Heart and soul of this defense.
I would say so. And when we thought it might be the defensive line entering the season, but obviously the injuries there have forced the linebackers to step up, and the linebacker depth has stepped up. Jake Golday, Simeon Coleman, Jared Bartlett,
Jonathan Thompson.
I mean, they've been all over the place. Safeties as well. When you think about Antoine Peak, Derek Canteen, and Josh Meekins. The spine of the Bearcats defense has been very strong, and it's going to have to get to Rocco Becht. I'm with you, Neil. Becht this season, 65.8 PFF grade when blitzed, 78.2 PFF grade when not blitzed. I'm feeling like Tyson's going to be dialing up some pressure, throwing the dogs to the wind a little bit here and saying, Rocco, if you're going to beat me in single coverage, my man. We're going to be bringing the heat against an offense, Neil, that ranks 28th in rushing EPA per play, 27th in offensive passing EPA per play. Just so much balance across the board from Iowa State. But where they struggle, Neil, is in the special teams category, and particularly creating short fields for this offense. Cincinnati, 5th national in defense and average field position faced with, versus the Iowa State side of things, 90th nationally, 91st nationally among offenses in starting field position. That's where Cincinnati can really take advantage here. They can force long drives from Iowa State. They can force a lot of throws, a lot of plays, a lot of chances where those 2 turnovers that you just mentioned, and I'm in agreement with you there, it's likely going to take a couple turnovers from them to pull off this upset. That's more likely to happen when you put them in long fields to work with and you get after Rocco Becht a little bit, get him off his mark. Don't let him get into a rhythm. I'm looking for them to bring the blitz and throw everything they can at Rocco Becht in terms of pressure in this game. Cincinnati, 12th nationally in time of possession. Iowa State, 21st nationally in time of possession. So they're used to dealing with these longer fields, Neil. They're used to getting after points with long slates of fields to go ahead of them. But Cincinnati has to keep making them work through that. They can't give up big plays here. You can't let a very balanced offense with a strong running game get out ahead and put you behind the 8 ball. All in all, I think getting after Rocco Becht is so important here, and I think blitzing Rocco Becht is going to be very important here to ultimately force them to run the football more than they should and just get this passing offense off of its mark throughout the entire game. Cincinnati strong on defense, 19th in rushing EPA allowed this season, 46th in drop back EPAs. Rocco Becht, I'm sure, seeing that 46th number and thinking that he can get after this defense a little bit. They cannot allow that to happen. They got to mitigate that EPA number with more pressure from those linebackers, more pressure from those defensive ends, and just bringing extra guys on the blitz. This is a Tyson Bites special week here, Neil. His dial-up plays, the way he calls this game defensively, is going to go a long way towards Cincinnati either winning or losing this contest. We'll get to the offensive side of the ball after these messages on Bearcat Blitz and a prediction for Saturday night's game against Iowa State. Neil, offensive side of things here now for Cincinnati. This is not an ideal defense to be facing with a quarterback struggling with their rhythm, like Brendan Sorsby has been in recent weeks, and a quarterback that has been giving the ball away in recent weeks at that. We mentioned them being number 2 in the conference in turnover margin this year. They are really balanced on offense and balanced on defense as well, a little bit more so leaning towards the pass coverage side of things than the run defense side. 12th nationally in PFF coverage grade. They have some coverage mavens sprinkled all across this secondary. 11th in dropback EPA allowed, but 68th in dropback success rate allowed. So that goes to the control the clock notion here. Success rate more so looks at how many successful plays you are achieving on a down-to-down basis versus EPA per play looks at how much kind of impactful plays you're creating on a down-to-down basis, how many big plays, how many major plays you're creating. And so them being a little leakier on the consistent 4-yard, 6-yard, 7-yard passing plays allowed is a way for Brendan Sorsby to maybe build up some steam here. But ultimately, I think that's got to be driven by the run game. It's just too good a pass defense, 5th best nationally in yards per attempt to ultimately throw the ball, I think, as much as UC's been throwing it lately. They're 41st in rushing EPA allowed as Iowa State, 111th in success rate allowed on the ground. So, Neil, this is one of those games where you feed Corey Kiner, Maybe you feed Evan Pryor 10-plus carries in this one, get him going a little bit more to take some of the load off of Kiner. Maybe mix in a third running back. 40 to 50 to 60 carries in this game would be just what the doctor ordered to ultimately bleed that clock, take the crowd out of it, take the turnover potential, lessen that turnover potential for the arm of Brendan Sorsby, and ultimately grind out this game on the grounds and get one done kind of in a close scenario at the end. I don't see how you can successfully drop back and pass 40, 45, 50 times in this game and think you're going to have success given how much weaker this ISU run defense is and ultimately how much you can kind of extend downs later into the sticks, the yards to gain. Like you can run on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, and then go for it on 3rd and 3 with another run. This ISU defense, 100th nationally in late down success rate for the opposing team on 3rd and 4th down. Neil, you got to be willing to go for it in this game. You got to be willing to extend drives. You got to put on basically an Army football mentality in this one, going into a hostile environment against a team this balanced. I don't ultimately think it's going to be enough from the Bearcats. I got them dropping this one 30-24 on the road against Rocco Becht and Iowa State, but I think they got a chance. And 9 points, that seems like a hefty amount of points.
Very hefty spread. Very hefty spread.
Cincinnati, Neil, that's not as balanced as Iowa State, but has not been getting blown out really at all this year. The only time they've gotten blown out in conference play, but lost by double digits, was against Colorado.
Yeah, no, Russ, most certainly. It's worth noting that this has to be a game where Corey Kiner gets 25 touches. Has to be. We saw
with
it on
decent
Saturday.
Efficiency, like over 4 yards a carry, 4.5 preferably
Correct.
for Corey in this game on heavy volume. Yeah, you're right, Neil.
We saw it on Saturday at Nippert Stadium versus West Virginia. I expect to see that again. 25 carries was a career high for Corey Kiner. But the biggest thing I'm going to note here, Russ, in order for Corey Kiner to get going, we talked to Scott Satterfield, we talked to Tyson Vike this season. In order for Corey Kiner to be successful, he needs to average 4 yards a carry. But although it's worth mentioning that the field conditions in Ames have been incredibly tough over the years. Obviously, Scott Satterfield mentioned it in the season as you see a couple guys slip that they're going to be bringing extra cleats that they might not take on the road. Essentially, for different field conditions, Tyson Vite said it's a grass field. There is some spots that you could go down, and I mean, you saw it in the Kansas game. Cincinnati, if they can find ways to stay up and get that run game going behind Corey Kiner, I think this is a game where Cincinnati might be able to go on the road and get an upset. But 9 points, Russ, I think is ridiculous of a spread right now. And if I'm a betting man, I would be taking Cincinnati plus the points in this one. So, but overall, I think you look for Cincinnati in this game, Russ. You have your whole offensive line back and healthy for one of the first times all season. We've seen it only like 3 or 4 games. And for Cincinnati to be successful versus Iowa State, offensive side of the ball, let the run game get going behind Corey Kiner. That will allow things to open up for Brendan Sorsby. Although Brendan Sorsby has to be dialed in and very locked in heading into this one because, guys, Iowa State's defense is incredible. They are second in the conference in interceptions with 14. Martinez and Williams, both the defensive backs, can't remember their first names, but both of those guys have 4 interceptions apiece, which is top 5 within the Big 12. We have seen this Iowa State defense cause troubles over the years, but in order for Cincinnati to be successful, I think you got to get the run game going. You got to have the energy going, but it's worth noting that the field conditions might play a factor into this one, Russ, but I don't expect this game to be a shootout or anything. I like the score prediction. I was going to go 31-24 in favor of Iowa State, so it's always crazy how Russ and I are back on the prediction.
We do not plan this, people. We don't talk about our scores beforehand. No.
Yeah, which is crazy. We never talk about it. So overall, I think this is going to be a game that's a lot closer, but there's a lot riding for both teams on this game. Iowa State's on a 2-game stretch after starting the season 7-0. Number 10 in the country. They have now fallen 2 weeks in a row, and they lost to a very bad Arizona team last week. So on top of it, they fall. All the momentum has kind of shifted from Iowa State while Cincinnati is trying to gain momentum here in the final stretch. So things could go one of two ways, guys. It could be an Iowa State just breezes by Cincinnati, gets back in the win column, or Cincinnati could come like we saw the first half of the season and put the world on notice on Saturday night and find their way back to a bowl game under Scott Satterfield. And if you're a Bearcats fan, you hope it's option 2. But however, this game's going to be a lot closer than people anticipate. So it's going to be really interesting. But, man, I'm excited to see what that run game can do. But, Russ, as you mentioned, you can't have these offensive drives where you're going 17 plays, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. You got to find a high-balanced offense, 13 plays, 12 plays, 11 plays, with 11, 12, 13-play drives. Sprinkle in some 5 to 8 play drives as well. Keep Iowa State off the field. If you can do that and you can move the ball with this offense versus a defense that Iowa State that has really struggled with the run, I think they'll be in great hands. But however, you got to be smart. You can't give up 17 points straight off turnovers, unfortunately.
Eat the sack, Sorsby. Just eat the sack, man. Just eat that sack. Don't throw the ball in harm's way. I think he's learned his lesson and will be much better for it from another learning experience against West Virginia. We'll see how he closes this season, maybe starting the stretch run with an upset. We'll have it all covered for you on Monday, including a recap of the Nicholls State contest on basketball side of things and the Iowa State clash on the road. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online, right here on the Believe Network.
6, Ritter to the end zone, looking for Pierce. Did he hang on? Yes. Touchdown. The back as I've been around. Here he goes again. Busts free. Jerome Ford down the sideline. Foot race. House call. Touchdown. 79 yards. Big run in the Peach Bowl. This is a big one, too.